Wednesday Night Rugby on Off the Ball.
With Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us.
Here, welcome along to Wednesday Night Rugby. Loads to discuss. Opening round of the Six Nations, now moving into the distant past. We have a very nice round two coming our way. Ireland-France, of course, the big one on Saturday evening. The Scots, fresh from their Calcutta Cup winner in Cardiff. And England will play Italy on the Sunday. Very happy to bring in Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent. Hey, Rory.
Hey Joe, how's it going?
And we have teamed you up once again. Such was the success, such was the public demand after your last outing together with Chris Jones, BBC's rugby union correspondent. Chris, the people demanded it, the people are getting it. Wow.
Yes, dream team. Hi guys, how's it going?
Yeah, great. Why do you follow 0 people on Twitter?
That's a good spot. I didn't know anyone noticed that. It's kind of because maybe, when you get in the height of like Brexit or COVID, you're just getting a lot of people that you want to follow for, say, like a rugby reason, then also retweeting stuff that, I don't know. I'm not saying I don't want to hear loads of different views, because I obviously do. I just found it kind of a bit more therapeutic just to not follow anyone, as antisocial as that sounds. I haven't really thought about it much, but obviously I've done it.
You log on to Twitter, your feed is nothing. Maybe just tweets from Chris Jones. I don't know.
No, because then you can make these lists, can't you? So I could then do a list and have people on a list. So I do follow people. It's just a different type of following, right, if that makes any sense.
Interesting. Good for the soul, I would think. Good for the brain.
I need to put. I'm not like antisocial and don't want to hear people's views. Come at me, say what you like.
Yeah. I think the truth here, Rory, is he's an incredibly arrogant man. He's not interested in the views of others.
It sounds like a lovely life.
It does, yeah.
I'd like that. I might follow his lead.
Gotta say.
So we have talked a lot about Ireland, and we will get to Ireland, but we have done an hour with Brian O'Driscoll in studio yesterday. There was Liam Toland and Jerry Thornley on Monday. Alan Quinlan's been on the AM show. Matt Williams on the AM show. We had Darren Cave and Fiona Hayes on the Sunday show. So let's just start in a different place and start with England. And Chris, that was the thinking in part in getting you on. So we talked with Rory late last year about this being a very interesting Six Nations campaign for Eddie Jones. It's just become a whole lot more interesting, I would say. Yeah. How much criticism is he on the receiving end of over there?
I think a reasonable amount, but I wouldn't say it's been an hysterical amount of criticism. I think it's been the criticism any coach would get when the Grand Slam's gone on day one, when the Grand Slam's gone for a sixth successive year, and when your side's lost the opener for the third year in a row. Eddie Jones has, since that kind of golden run in 16 and 17, his record has been really up and down. 18 was a flop of a Six Nations, 21 was a flop of a Six Nations, 19 was middling, 20 was okay, and they won the whole thing, so great, but they'd lost on the opening night. The slam was gone. They relied on a losing bonus point, and they won it on points difference. 21, as we know, didn't go so well. Then he's had some great autumns, put Australia to the sword plenty, that amazing World Cup semi-final against New Zealand, that tactical masterclass against South Africa last time out. But then just when you think, right, is this the year that England really start to, put another Six Nations trophy back in the cabinet, it's gone on the opening day. And yeah, he's had injuries. And when you lose Farrell, you lose Laws. And the other players that are out, that's a big blow. But he took some gambles with that team selection. He didn't pick a ball carrier in the back line in the team or really on the bench. And the one guy who could maybe carry through traffic, Jack Noel, didn't get on for 82 minutes. The Smith-Ford substitution's been under the spotlight. I think that's one of those that can go either way. If that comes through, then that makes total sense. 78 cap veteran coming on the hour mark in the Murrayfield wet. Yeah, but certainly a few of his calls have been under scrutiny, which you would expect, for a rugby side like England.
I agree with you on the Marcus Smith substitution, for instance. Like, I know Clive Woodward in his column in the Mail went to town on Jones for that substitution, but I do agree that can go either way, and there is a logic in a more experienced head being brought on to see out the game. I suppose what surprised me and would have disappointed me most from an English point of view is that I listened to you and Matt Dawson interviewing Eddie Jones a couple of weeks ago in advance of this tournament, and the way he was talking about the trends in the game and the types of players he was bringing in suggested we would see running rugby, attacking rugby, expansive rugby, and we saw anything but, which really made me question what Jones has been working on over the last couple of weeks, unless he was just trying to rope-a-dope everyone, you and Matt Dawson included.
Well, he's not adverse to doing that. He's not adverse to saying something and doing something different. But I did believe him when he takes such a kind of forensic interest in rugby all over the world. So he's always looking at the way the game is reffed and the way the game is going in terms of attacking. And, if England do lose a game at the breakdown, he'll come up with a theory and a reason why. I think a lot of his tactics were preordained on the weekend because he was spooked by the Murrayfield weather. I don't know if 2 years ago when it was storm, whatever it was, and that was a monsoon, those were unplayable conditions. Maybe he thought it was going to be similar, but actually it cleared up just before kickoff. And England played a fair bit of rugby, around the 10s, which, is all well and good. Then when they did have the odd opportunity, they couldn't execute. And I've just been surprised by the chat out of the England camp this last few days, which has been, we dominated possession and territory. Great. What does that mean? What does that mean in Test rugby? The All Blacks rarely dominate possession and territory. They do what Scotland did, which is when you do get a chance 40 metres out, you take your one-shot kill and you score 7 points. And you say to the team who's been banging away for half an hour, well, that was all well and good. We just did it in 7 seconds, which is what Scotland did with the Ben White try. So I was surprised at hearing that because that's the difference between a good team and a great team, or a good team and a bad team. Turning possession and territory, turning opportunity, and just saying things like, we just need to execute. But execution's kind of been England's issue for a while. This time last year, Calcutta Cup, they're kicking away overlaps because they had some success grubbering through a couple of championships ago. But that maybe is the consequence of not having a carrier in your back line. It means that you're just going to try and turn the opposition around, and you're not going to be comfortable setting it up, going through traffic or whatever. So it's a complicated one with England because he's picked a certain side, which I think was done to kick the ball and squeeze Scotland, and they just weren't able to. Got close, played well in a lot of facets of the game, but then lost their heads in the final quarter. And for an England side, that is a bit of a recurring theme, which I think will concern England fans.
Rory, thoughts on England and Jones?
Yeah, there's a lot going on with England at the moment. One thing, just listening to Chris there, struck me is that I've been thinking about this a little bit, that Joe Schmidt used to get obsessed by the weather as well. And I wonder if Southern Hemisphere coaches coming up here get a little bit obsessed by the weather. And when things, when the forecast is bad, they react quite strongly to it and maybe don't trust the Northern Hemisphere players to have the skill set to go out and play in rough weather. Whereas Andy Farrell and Gregor Townsend, who both grew up in Northern Hemisphere conditions and played, their entire lives through it, were more trusting of their players to execute more attacking game plans and not as kind of, not go into their shells as much. I mean, Eddie Jones picked a team based on, that looked like it was a team picked on a weather forecast on Sunday, which is, at this stage of your development, you should be able to go and play even, obviously you make some allowances for it, but you don't, the idea that you don't want the ball at all, if you're supposed to be going down the road of a more attacking game plan, you don't just change that because the conditions are going to be bad. You got to still be able to play. We still, there are examples either in the Southern Hemisphere in New Zealand or more recently up here of teams being able to play through the weather. So I just wonder whether having a Southern Hemisphere coach, although it gives you some great insight sometimes, can backfire. On the whole, I watched the England-Scotland game first in a kind of crowded place, so I didn't get a great sense of it. So I watched it back again a couple of days later, and I was surprised by how low quality it was. I thought, compared to France's performance, compared to Ireland's performance, on both sides there was an awful lot of mistakes. And England are just guilty of being a really muddled team throughout that second half, making bad decisions, making bad errors against a very good Scottish team who are on the up. But you would expect this English team, even with all their changes and all of their the issues that Chris has outlined already, to be better in that scenario. It was almost reminiscent of the 2015 World Cup game against Wales, where they were in a commanding position and just went to pieces, in front of their home audience on the biggest stage. The Rob Shaw moment is the one leading example of that. But that game, they with Harry kept making bad decisions and bad errors and handed it back to them. And at this stage of Eddie Jones' time in charge, they really should be past all of that. You go back to all of the potential distractions off field. Eddie Jones writing a book about leadership where he criticises Maro Itoje's captaincy credentials when Itoje is clearly his best player and is the most obvious captain that I can see from the outside in that squad, and yet he's basically backed himself into a corner where he can't pick him because he wrote a book and mentioned it in it. He's tried to backtrack since, but like, what's he doing writing a book? And talking about current players in the middle of it all. There's just so much going on with England and so much going on with Eddie Jones that is fine once you're winning, but once it starts going wrong, you go back to that own slot piece a couple of months ago and all the churn of backroom team and the altercations with staff and not letting John Mitchell go to see his son play cricket. Like, there's just the mad stuff that's going on behind the scenes. Again, fine if you're winning, but as soon as things start going wrong, you can't imagine it's an easy place to be right now. And you wonder how long Jones can sustain it all.
Yeah. On what he said about Itoje, just in case anybody missed that, I might be wrong, but I'm not sure Maro is a future England captain. He's going to be one of the great players, but Maro is very inward looking. He drives himself rather than anyone else. And I think he sent him to acting classes. We've sent Maro to acting classes, which is having a beneficial effect. He speaks more influentially now, and I'm hopeful he can develop more communication and leadership skills. Acting brings Maro out of himself. How has all this gone down with Maro Itoje, I wonder, Chris?
Yeah, it's a very good question. What you will not get, really, is England players upsetting the apple cart. I think primarily because they want to stay in the side and win and play for their country. But there's an elephant in the room here as well, and the fact that, and I'm not referring to any individual here, I've got to stress that, but if an England player speaks up against Eddie Jones and is cast aside, not just do they lose caps, lose a chance of winning a World Cup, and lose playing for their country, which drives them, they also lose an enormous amount of money. So what you won't really get, and I was speaking to an England World Cup winner in 2003 over a few drinks the other day, and they were saying how often they challenged Clive Woodward during the game, after the game, in the week, before the game. Different era, I know, but I just don't know how often that is going on. Maybe it's going on behind closed doors, and we're not there privy to see it. But you don't really get that impression that there is an enormous amount of challenge. But that's not a new comment when looking at the Eddie Jones regime. And it was a criticism of the Lancaster era that it was a little bit too collegiate and collaborative, and the assistant coaches had too much sway. And with Eddie Jones, we know quite clearly who is in charge pretty much of English rugby, and it is Eddie Jones. And I don't think that's an inappropriate comment. On the Itoje thing, look, there's an argument that Itoje could have been England captain for 4 years by now, because when Dylan Hartley moved off the scene and done a really good job from 16 to 18, it looked like Itoje could have been that man to step in, because Farrell, you're always going to get a level of leadership. It reminds me of Sexton. It reminds me of Dan Biggar. You're always going to get a level of leadership from these kind of world-class competitors. Do they need to be captain as well, or do they then have so much focus on them? In the same way, Andy Farrell could have made James Ryan captain, couldn't he? Straight after the World Cup, and gone, look, you can have 7-8 years in the role if you play your cards right. But he didn't. He went with Sexton, and Jones has gone with Farrell. But that inward comment is a funny one, because if you look at Jones's vice captains, Ellis Genge, Luke Cowan-Dickey, and Henry Slade, all great players, but you would never describe Henry Slade as an extrovert, or certainly doesn't give that image off to the media and to the fans. So it's a tricky one. Yeah. I struggle with it myself. I completely agree with Rudd. Itoje has been that future England captain figure, but for whatever reason, and Jones outlined it in that leadership book, he just doesn't see him as a leader. Whether he will suddenly spring a surprise in 6 months' time and go, he's done his acting classes, now he's a captain. You never know with Eddie Jones. Maybe this is all part of a master plan to build Itoje up to that level. But yeah, certainly the fact that Itoje is not on the inner sanctum of England leadership does feel a funny one.
Well, I think that's all absolutely fine. And if that's Jones's assessment of Itoje's personality, no problem. It's the detailing it to the world and potentially embarrassing Itoje. I wouldn't like to be discussed in those terms. I wouldn't like to be called not a leader and inward looking, certainly not publicly. And by the way, tell the world I've been sent to acting classes as well. I mean, James Ryan may accept or not accept why he's not captain. I think he would have a legitimate point if Andy Farrell wrote a book about it, though, Rudd.
Yeah, and like, far be it for me to be poo-pooing, access or information or this kind of insight, because it's great. And even like England, released a video the other day of Itoje giving the kind of rallying speech in the dressing room after the game. So he's clearly reacting well to it. And this has been going on between Eddie Jones and Itoje throughout Eddie Jones' time. He used to describe him as a car. He used to compare it to different types of car when he first came in, and if he was going well, he was a Ferrari, and if he wasn't, he was, I don't know, like he wasn't ever a ladder. But it was kind of this sliding scale up. It was just this kind of mad thing where this guy is clearly an iconic or potentially iconic figure in English rugby. He transcends the game and is probably the only player in that squad. Correct me if I'm wrong, Chris, but who kind of is more recognisable outside of rugby than anyone else. He's represented by Rock Nation. He is potentially your biggest star, and he's been kind of belittled in public by the coach. Certainly, that's how I would perceive it, and it seems like a very strange thing to do. And maybe he knows Itoje a lot better than I do, and maybe he feels like these are the buttons he needs to push. But for me, possibly the two best team performances I've ever seen live are from this English team under Eddie Jones. The 2019 Six Nations dismantling of Ireland and the 2019 World Cup semi-final against New Zealand, like two of the most complete performances. And the man who's at the heart of both of those, in my view, was Maro Itoje. In that game against New Zealand, it was possibly the best individual performance I've ever seen from any player. And if I was a coach, and I'm not, and I'm not paid as much as Eddie Jones, but I also am not subject to the scrutiny he's subject to, that's the guy I'd be backing, and I'd be putting all my faith in rather than other people.
Chris, in terms of on the field approach then, so as I understand it, Manu Tuilagi played at the weekend and they're trying to get minutes into his legs. So you mentioned the ball carrier problem at Murrayfield. So let's say he comes back. He has a transformative, I think, ability for any team. Shoot this down straight away. Is there much talk in English rugby of have we passed on the Vunipola brothers too quickly here? One's 29, one's 31. I don't know what their form is like. I don't know what their fitness is like. I don't know where they are. But I mean, I know as an Irish fan scarred over the last number of years, if we pitch up in Twickenham in a few weeks and there's no Tuilagi and no Vunipolas, I won't be upset.
No. And look, Rod mentioned Itoje in terms of those iconic England performances under Jones, and whatever happens, from here on into 2023 with Eddie Jones and England, however they do it the next World Cup, they've got that 2019 night in Yokohama where they basically knocked New Zealand off their perch and kicked them off their throne, and that'll be remembered by England fans forever. And not just Itoje was instrumental, but both Vunipolas and Tuilagi. And the Vunipolas, I think when it comes to Mako, there's been murmurings for a couple of years now that in terms of the set piece, he maybe is not the force he was. Marla is such an accomplished scrummager that they want him in and around the squad. Genge is a vice captain. So I think Mako, even though there's every chance he can come back in, I wonder if his magnificent England career might be it for him. Who knows? And Billy Vunipola, maybe they just feel that he's also reached an age where he's not quite as explosive as he was. But it's less about those individuals. It's more about Jones trying to make a statement about moving on from the Saracens core, moving away from the Vunipolas, moving away from Jamie George. The irony of that is that Farrell was still captain. So this is where it feels slightly contradictory, because on the one hand he's dropping Saracens players and saying we've got too much Saracens leadership, and then he has Farrell as captain, albeit with a younger and a very different, more sort of club diverse group of vice captains. But the Tuilagi thing, it's been the subplot of English rugby now for 11 years since his debut. 11 years. When Manu's fit, all is well in the world. He gives gain line, he holds defences, he allows the skillful players, and not that he isn't skillful, but he allows the Henry Slades, the George Fords, the Owen Farrells to shine, get people like Johnny May, Anthony Watson, Elliot Daly on the ball to make hay. Then he's not there, and Farrell plays at 12, and he's been kind of, he's really done England a magnificent service at 12, but it's always felt like, it's a stopgap, or let's get Tuilagi alongside Farrell with George Ford or whatever, maybe with Marcus Smith now. So what happens when Tuilagi's fit? He comes straight back in. He's played 20 minutes, and he won't play in Rome. He's not in the squad. I think he'll come off the bench against Wales, and he'll start against Ireland, all being well fitness-wise. So he then transforms England. They beat Ireland, do whatever happens in Paris, and then what happens if Tuilagi gets injured again, which is possible because of his record? Then are England scrabbling around looking for a midfield again? It's not sustainable for English rugby to be putting all of their eggs in the Tuilagi basket. Sam Warburton said this the other night on our Rugby Union Daily pod. He said, how many English qualified centres are there out there? It is insane. He used the word insane to put all of the stall in Tuilagi. But that's the reality, because when Tuilagi's fit, they've got a ball, a gain line midfielder And when he's not fit, they go in with Henry Slade and Elliot Daly in the midfield. Completely different. So it's a completely different strategy. It's not like the All Blacks used to do. Marnoni or Sonny Bill. Both can give you gain. That's where it just... You feel that it can't just be up to Tuolangi to transform this England attack.
Yes, that's very interesting. Very muddled, all right. OK, well, we'll see how England go in Rome at the weekend. Our rugby coverage here and Off the Ball is with thanks to Vodafone, main sponsor of the Irish rugby team. We all belong to the team of us. We're here with Chris Jones and Rory O'Connor. So let's turn towards Paris, Saturday evening. We've been congratulating ourselves all week. Chris, you might as well tell us how great we are as well.
Well, the only caveat I'd put to how good Ireland were was that I think most people saw that coming. Most people saw Ireland putting Wales to the sword because of how slick Ireland looked in the autumn, the fitness they've got in their squad, the cohesion, the form of the provinces, and then also the poverty of Wales. So you put that together, and it was no surprise to see the game as one-sided as it was. And I think Ireland look the real deal, don't they? But it's a completely different challenge out in Paris. Their three best results under Andy Farrell: England, New Zealand in the autumn, England last year, New Zealand in the autumn, Wales just now. They've all been in Dublin. That's not their fault. They've only played in Dublin since the England game. But this is a completely different matter. France, in a raucous Stade de France, smelling their first championship since 2010. So we're going to learn a lot more about Ireland, aren't we, after this weekend? We know they're a good side, full of good players. They look supremely drilled and well coached. But this is another matter altogether going over to Paris, I think.
Yeah, I would tend to agree. I'm spooked by all the Irish predictions thus far, Rory. I would make France clear favourites to win by not much, but clear favourites to win.
3-point game in the bookies, Joe. So it's not as like people usually that's where you find the kind of more sobering read on how the game is going to go. But it was an Irish bookmaker I looked at, so maybe people are putting their money where their mouth is and moving the market. But certainly Ireland have what it takes to go there and win. But you would have certain reservations about the kind of the French power game across 80 minutes. And you go back to Leinster, La Rochelle. We have to start bringing Leinster games into this because Leinster provide the bulk of the squad, and the way La Rochelle beat Leinster in that Heineken Champions Cup semi-final shows a little bit of the way for France, especially because Weenie Antonio will play a tight head prop, and they will have the capacity to match Ireland's tight five power and then some. And then after 50 minutes, they'll bring on a like-for-like replacement in each position and ramp things up. I would expect Ian Henderson to go back into the match day 23. Perhaps he comes onto the bench along with, and comes off the bench with Finlay Bealham to kind of provide a bit of ballast to Finlay Bealham. But this is nothing on, Finlay Bealham's a fine player. He's done very well for Ireland, but we have never seen him go to this level. And that is the big question. Does Tadhg Furlong come off after 50, 60 minutes when he's spent? And are you bringing on a player who can close out a game away from home in Paris? Not to put everything on one man, but if Finlay Bealham closes that game out, then he has answered pretty much every question about his role in this squad and has cemented his place in the pecking order. He's slightly smaller than the other front rows that Ireland have available. He's a lovely player, but he's not as explosive. It's a lot of pressure for him coming into this arena, and he will face a test unlike any other that he's had across his career, because that's where France will go after Ireland. They'll look to lock down that tight five. They'll look to tire out the props. They'll look to make sure that they are dead on their feet when they're trying to make those passes. It's all well and good making that pass when you're feeling fresh, but if you've been locked into scrums and it's been taken out of your legs, then things get much tougher. France will try and maul Ireland off the park. They'll try and they've got all the out the back capabilities as well, but they have like a tractor lock in Paul Valemsa, who's I can't remember exactly what weight. I think 134 kilos. I could be wrong. And Antonio is the heaviest player in the tournament, and they've got him fit, and they're both fit, so that they will cause Ireland no end of problems. So that's where the game will be won and lost, and that's where Ireland haven't been asked the questions, because New Zealand came to Dublin with possibly their least skillful front row of the last 10-15 years. Wales don't really have that in their armour, and it was less of a factor in the England game last Six Nations, because Porter hadn't switched across. But Ireland's game is so based around those players being able to do what they do, and every forward being a viable option and a carrier and a passing threat as well, that if Ireland gets sucked into a real battle and those forwards are tired, what happens then? Or if they don't win the gain line. What happens then? We don't know yet. We haven't seen it in the last, since probably Twickenham in or maybe it's the France game last year was the last time Ireland properly got beaten up. But it's been a while, and that's the test for this team now, that they're on a crest of a wave, 9 unbeaten, but the last 7 of those have all been at home. This is a very different challenge, and it's a great position to be in, to go and see if they've made those improvements to that degree.
And that's the kind of sobering negative slant that makes me feel more comfortable, I have to say, Chris. How do you see that battle up front then?
Yeah, I think it's in France's hands, and that's only because of the example. Rod cites those examples of Leinster being beaten up by La Rochelle, England getting the better of Ireland a few times at Twickenham through 2020. This is a different Ireland side. They're playing with more dynamism. They're not sending runners out to be lambs to the slaughter to an oppressive defence. But fascinating, isn't it? Sean Edwards, my cat coaching the Ireland defence. Sean Edwards, masterminding the French defence. I do wonder whether Sean Edwards just he constantly. I think he's got such motivation to take this French side to real heights. He's obviously coached so much for Wales in the Six Nations, gone up against all these different coaches. But I think with France, he feels that he could have such a transformational impact on French rugby because, with all the great work that other coaches are doing, and Laurent Lebeat with the backs and Ibanez and Galtier, Edwards is the guy who's come from outside in, and he's the example of the French bucking the trend. Rather than go for the all French coaching team, they've actually gone, right, we're gonna get some external influence, and he's no doubt been a part of the way they look more drilled, they look fitter, so they are ominous. We don't quite know yet mentally if the French can still be exploited. We saw their complete brain explosion in Paris against Scotland, where I think Bruce Doolan kind of thought he needed to keep playing almost for some kind of Gallic pride, when in reality he walks that out and France win the game, and then Scotland don't go to Paris and win, and things could have been so different for the table and even for Scotland players getting on that Lions tour. But that's another one altogether. I'm just so excited for the game. I'm going out to Paris first thing Friday, so it's our big commentary on BBC Radio this weekend, which is sort of trumping the other two, which just says how much these two are looking like the two form horses in the Six Nations. And you got to say, whoever wins this will be a really tough team to stop winning the whole thing. Yeah, well, with all genuine respect to the Scots, this feels like the Grand Slam eliminator game, and it's compelling for so many reasons. Are there any whispers, Rory, on Henshaw coming back in at this stage of the week?
I think he'll be in the 23. I don't know at this stage whether he'll be in the 12 jersey or whether they'll leave Bundyaki in and bring Henshaw on to supplant. I think one of them will be in the 23 jersey, one of them will be in the 12 jersey. They'll both be involved. It's just a matter of who gets the nod. Very hard to take Bundyaki out of the equation. I know Brian made a good kind of case for it last night. Very hard to change that team after last week. Two guys have had injury issues just in case that they pull up after 15 minutes, and you can trust the other guy to go on for 65 and be okay. Maybe that's what you do. I'm not sure. So no, it's a bit early yet, but I would definitely expect them both to be in. I think Henshaw comes in for Hume, and I would expect Henderson to come in for Byrne. Not for Byrne, for Ryan Baird. Just a matter of whether they come straight into the team or onto the bench. Okay. Chris, before you go, quick word on the Scots. I know you're at Murrayfield for 5 Live, obviously, and they go to Cardiff. So as poor and lamentable as Wales were at the weekend, and as predictable as that was, off the back of a defeat and at Cardiff is still going to offer up something. So look, I don't think many of us are fully convinced of the Scots just yet. So what did you see and what do you think? I was really impressed. I think it was another step forward for Scotland. I think they took a big step back against South Africa because there are a few component parts of their game that went to pot, aerially, scrum, killed at the breakdown, kicking battle, all those kind of test match rugby, non-negotiables. They failed against South Africa. So I thought, actually, is this Scotland side going to take that next step and be proper title contenders? But I really like the way they scored from deep against England and soaked up a lot of English pressure, met England physically on the gain line in defence. Steve Tandy's got them one of the best defensive records. That's indisputable. And I think they showed both creativity and composure in that final 20 minutes. So I am a big fan of this Scotland side, and I like the way that, being challenged to keep up their strong record against England, being challenged to take the scalp of an England team that were heading up with a sort of
a cobbled together lineup that raised so many eyebrows with key players missing, but also some strange selections. It was in Scotland's hands. And I think if Scotland had lost, a lot of questions will be being asked, but they didn't. They won, and they need massive credit for that, especially when 7 points down at home with Murrayfield going quiet. You're right. Ireland at home, Ireland away, and Scotland at home are completely different matches for Wales. And that's with respect to Scotland. But this is going to be a smarting Wales side that have heard all the chat about crisis at Welsh rugby, complete existential issues that they need to resolve. What's the future of the game in the Principality? But they'll also know that give them 70-odd thousand, give them hymns and arias, and give them, a little bit of a chance to get the crowd involved, and they will take it. I'm going to back Scotland. I just am worried that Wales actually are struggling to see where Wales are going to win this game, which is a difficult one given that Wales haven't lost in Cardiff in 20 years against Scotland. But I just think this is a disciplined Scotland side. It's an organised Scotland side. I think Finn Russell is playing fly half in 4 or 5 different ways these days. I wonder if they'll bring Cam Redpath in now he's got some more rugby for Bath, and try and put Wales to the sword and exploit their backline defence. So another fascinating game. I think the games on Saturday are just compelling. Can't wait for either. Yeah.
So look, clock against me. Chris, who wins in Paris?
France in Paris and Scotland in Cardiff.
Okay. Rud, final word to you. You don't have to give me in a line. Who's going to win in Paris?
I tipped Ireland at the start of the tournament, so I kind of have to stick with them. Although I've laid out a lot of kind of reasons why I'm getting more doubtful as the fixture approaches, but if Ireland are able to win that game line battle in the Type 5 exchanges and hold their own there for 80 minutes, then they have the capabilities to take this French team to a place they haven't been and play at a pace with the breakdown and the quick ball that they're able to bring to cause them all sorts of problems. And with the injury profile, the form, the confidence, I think they can just about do it. But it wouldn't surprise me at the same time if it all fell apart and France were able to overpower them. And I agree with Chris. I think Scotland will beat Wales.
Okay, very good. Rory O'Connor of the Irish Independent and Chris Jones. Chris, just to let you know, he's at Rory OC. I'm at Molloy Joe. Just think about it.
Well, you might be on my rugby list. Who knows?
Well, indeed.
Secret list.
Keep up the good work on the rugby pod. Thanks, Emil.
Thanks loads for having me again.
Cheers, lads.
Cheers, guys.